Hey everyone. Philip Cross, headline from the Financial Post. Fiscal stimulus isn't just failing, it's setting us up for a whole new economic crisis. No shit, Sherlock, right? It has been 8 years since massive monetary and fiscal stimulus was adopted throughout the G7 to tame the global financial and economic crisis. However, these nations, including Canada, remain mired in slow growth despite sustaining and even expanding the stimulus. Like printing money, like just such. Anyway, won't even get to that. Why these policies failed to restore faster growth is the main question for economists today. It's one I explore in a paper I just released by the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. So, all these experts, these people from academia, some of them, the ones that are even closely aligned with understanding these things are the ones that actually understand macroeconomics properly, not central planning economics, because if you play by the role or the model of central planning economics, you leave so much of the equation that there's no way that your analysis or any findings that you come to or any conclusions that you derive are ever going to make any sense or have any genuine basis for how the real world functions. That's the fucking biggest divide, the biggest problem I see in people that claim to be economists, is there are those that come from academia that have actually no real world tangible experience in running a business and how actual economics works, right? And how you create a customer base, and like people don't even understand how that, to do that and to be successful at doing that. Once you've done that, then you might start to understand and have a basis of understanding regarding actual business sense in the real world. But if it's just someone from academia that has never even tried to play that scenario out in the real world, these are all just theories, okay? This is so important that I need people to understand. The people that you hear constantly be talked about as experts, they're only experts in academia, in theory. Economic theorists. I don't give a fuck about, to me, how could you call someone an expert if they're only an expert in a theory and have no real world practical experience to draw upon, right? Fuck. We can all come up with many different scenarios that we can dream up in our mind and then write some kind of a paper or analysis or an opinion that will align with what we build up in our mind. The problem is, try playing that scenario in the real world and see if everything aligns the same way then. That's what happens. That's where that's where the great divide of government or political economists and those free market economists. The free market economists are actually willing to acknowledge and accept that they don't know everything. People like Adam Smith that understand the invisible hand and the fact that markets aren't some giant monolith or collective like the Borg. It's a whole lot of people. And you can draw some baseline generalizations, but that is not the same of having some kind of scientific formulation where 1 + 1 is always going to equal 2. Macroeconomics today tries to put forth that kind of premise, but it's absolutely bullshit. It's a lie. And it's been proven to be a complete lie. And you don't even have to go by people's opinions. Just look at the world around you. That will tell you right now. That is the proof. The proof is right out there all around you. That centrally planned economies always fail because these economists that are central planners, they're control freaks and sociopaths. So they don't want to even take into account the thought processes, the reasoning, the logic, or the decisions of the general population or the masses or individuals in particular or business execs. They don't, that's off the table. Collectivism completely destroys anything that has to do with the individual. That's why, like I say, it's constantly proven to be, and we're seeing this time and time again. How much more evidence does it take? Years of extraordinary monetary and fiscal stimulus, these are just twisting distorted words, reinventing of the human or the English language, but monetary and fiscal, just money, printing money, right? Which is counterfeiting. Counterfeiting. Can we start using that word? I haven't even heard that word. When's the last time you heard the word counterfeit being talked about, right? And we all know that was discussed many times when I was growing up, but you don't hear that word ever thrown around anymore, right? But that is, in reality, that's what central banks are doing. They're counterfeiting. They're creating false demand when there is none. If you or I or any other person ever on the planet ever tried to do it, you're a criminal for doing so. But because the legislative powers of government give these central banks, because that's, remember, the laws, people try to say central banks are, oh, they're private institutions. Really? Who do you think makes up the laws for these institutions? Who do you think instituted the very law that made it even legitimate to have a central bank? Yeah, governments. I mean, the central bank, it's an act of legislation, folks. To pretend otherwise is just, like I said, sticking your head in the sand and pretending that reality doesn't exist. But it does. Have not jump-started a strong recovery for the advanced economies. You mean just someone giving you a bunch of credit cards? Anyways. For the advanced economies, real GDP growth averaged nearly 3% before the crisis. Since then, it has averaged 0.9%, including 1.7% for the last 4 years. The Eurozone has been particularly anemic, with growth averaging 0.3% since 2010. Japan has adopted 15 fiscal stimulus packages since 1990, maintained zero interest rate policies for 15 years, and implemented 9 rounds of quantitative easing, all without lasting benefits. And now, as we all know, they're into negative territory, where you have to pay a bank to try to save any money, just like in some parts of Europe, right? Like, think about how fucked that is. And even then, the growth has been anemic at best. So even with all of this central planning, does that should explain to you. So that's the thing. Do you think they just didn't do enough central planning? Trillions and trillions. I mean, what's the U.S. Federal Reserve bought up? What, almost $4 trillion worth of printed money, right? And the ECB, I don't know how many trillions, and all these other. So do you what? They're just not printing enough. Do you think that is, or maybe in reality it's because it's just the wrong way to go about things, right? Central planning is not the way. And this has been understood and talked about, discussed, and almost universally accepted up until this modern new world that we live in today, right? There's a reason why these economists, these free market economists, were held in such high regard, even by people that would probably want to hate them, is because that when they spoke truth, you couldn't deny truth. Truth was actually, at some stage of the game, prior to this new world, this, George Orwellian 1984 type newspeak fucking scenario we live in today, people actually understood things back in the day. That's actually how humanity has always progressed and advanced, was people actually would try to learn, understand, and grasp real world concepts instead of this mystical shit. I mean, some people did, but the intellectual types, right? Or the people that actually cared about how, you lived in this big giant spinning globe floating through space at 1,000 miles an hour. They used to actually care about the truth and objective reason and logic. Nowadays, like I say, it's all everything you hear is all ideologically driven. Nothing comes from truth or objective reason anymore. And you're seeing it playing out in real world, in real time. Why has unprecedented monetary and fiscal stimulus not produced the desired results? Partly because it is being asked to do something it is incapable of, boosting growth over the long term. Some analysts go further, or some analysts go further, arguing that the very policies designed to boost growth in the short term subtract from it in the long term. Stimulus partly works by shifting demand from the future to the present via more borrowing and risk-taking. Well, of course. If you borrow now, it's going to mean you're going to have left to spend in the future. I mean, that only makes fucking sense. Jesus Christ, people. No matter what, even if you get raised in the future, no matter how, whatever other kind of scenario you try to pay, say in the interview, say you're going to be richer in the future. Well, if you take and assume more spending now, it's still going to detract from that. If you spend less now, you're going to have more at the end, no matter what level you're talking or discussing. right? I mean, come on, people. Let's just use common sense here, right? Stimulus partly works by shifting to, at a deeper level, emergency levels of monetary and fiscal stimulus were never intended to be sustained for a long period because of the distortions they introduce into a wide range of decisions about saving, investing, and borrowing that lower long-term potential growth. Psychology, right? Human psychology. You're not just changing short-term little things. You're not just fucking moving chess pieces around on the board. You're changing human psychology, and you don't think that's going to have long-standing ramifications? Of course it is. As the Bank for International Settlements stressed in its 2016 annual report, tomorrow eventually becomes today. We are living in the future we distorted and borrowed from to avoid a worse recession several years ago. So rather than dealing with the pain of all the bad investments, all the malinvestments, all the bad decisions, all the cronyism, all the bullshit, all the central planning, rather than dealing with all that and trying to move forward, right? Taking that one step back and then trying to go 2 steps forward. They didn't even want to take that step back. They doubled down on their fucking wrong behavior, the wrong decisions, the wrong economic modeling and habits, and you wonder why things are continuing to get worse. This is why. You can't double down on bad decisions and think that that's going to help you better in the long run. It's actually, the long run game is looking very perilous at this stage of the game. Can it be changed? Yeah. Probably, but it's going to require a whole lot of drastic differences in changing in mentalities and thinking from a whole lot of people in academia, in corporations, in government. But are they willing to change their ways? Change is difficult for most, right? Or are they going to double down on their own ideologically driven narratives and promotion of such, right? I don't know. The future will bear it out. We'll find out in the long run. This is the Canadian Libertarian, and I love liberty.